and welcome everyone to the Student Empowerment through SEL in Music Education webinar series. Thank you for being here for episode 7, Reimagining the Orchestra through SEL. My name is Rebecca Hoff from Save the Music Foundation. Save the Music is proud to partner with the Center for Arts Education and Social Emotional Learning to produce this free webinar series. Lastly, this work was made possible through the support of KKR COVID Response Fund, a sponsored project of Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors. We thank them for making this possible. Now it is my pleasure to introduce you to our facilitator for today's episode, Dr. Scott Edgar, Director of Practice and Research for the Center for Arts Education and Social Emotional Learning. Scott.
Rebecca, thank you, and thank you to everyone from Save the Music for helping to make this evening's webinar a reality. I think many of us can resonate with the feeling that we've had some of the most meaningful music-making experiences in large ensembles. But I think we can also remember some times when maybe we didn't feel like we exactly fit in. There's opportunities that we can highlight where students don't fall in love with band, choir, and orchestra. And let's just be honest, band, choir, and orchestra may not fall in love with them. That's what today is all about. How can we open wider doors into our orchestral classrooms so that students can be a part of that, explore their feelings of identity, belonging, and agency in this space? And I can think of no better two people to join us than the panelists who we have with us today. First, we'll have Jonathan Taylor Rush. Hailed as a continually rising talent in the conducting world by the Baltimore Sun, Jonathan Taylor Rush brings passion, unique interpretation, and a refreshing energy to the orchestral experience. Rush was appointed as the assistant conductor for the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra in the fall of 2020. Previously, Rush served as the music director for the Buckeye Philharmonic Orchestra, as well as conducting fellow for the Baltimore Symphony Youth Orchestra. In 2018, Rush was a project inclusion conducting fellow with the Chicago Sinfonietta, and in 2019 was named assistant conductor. As winner of the 2018 Respighi Prize in Conducting at age 22, Rush made his professional orchestral debut with the Chamber Orchestra of New York in Carnegie Hall. Rush continues to conduct both nationally and internationally with notable debuts including the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, Chicago Sinfonietta, Baltimore Symphony Orchestra, and Nairobi Philharmonic. Joining Jonathan will be Isaac Sinnett. He is the Senior Associate Director of Ravinia's renowned Reach, Teach, Play education programs. In his 15 years with Ravinia, Isaac has contributed greatly to the growth of their portfolio of educational programs. He has also led the creation of Ravinia's El Sistema-inspired program, Sistema Ravinia, a program that continues to strive for musical growth, positive social development of youth, and pathways for continued success. Collaborating with colleagues from around the globe, he embraces the values of El Sistema, notably leaning into the ideals of access, equity, community, musicianship, and ensemble. As you can see, we are in for such a treat tonight. So we can't wait to hear Jonathan's story, but first, here is an iconic cartoon that represents how many of us were first exposed to the orchestra.
Leopold! Hello, everyone. Imagine this clip maybe about 20 years ago, and there's this 5 or 6-year-old boy watching it in absolute awe, mesmerized by Bugs Bunny making an absolute fool out of conducting. Imagine this boy being so inspired and yet so inspired and motivated that he grabs his mother's sewing needles and starts to conduct his imaginary orchestra in front of a mirror. Maybe one day it's chopsticks from Chinese takeout. And he's conducting in front of this mirror to either music that he's blasting throughout his home or even, making up inside of his head. But then imagine this boy so inspired that he goes online to research conductors. And as he's looking up conductors, his inspiration is slowly fading away. Not because he couldn't find any conductors, and not because Bugs Bunny wasn't real either, but because he could not find a conductor that looked like him. Well, that young boy was me. Jonathan Rush, born and raised in an extremely musical household where both his parents are actually gospel musicians and pastors, where his sisters are also gospel singers, and lived inside of a house where, yes, while he was pretty much born inside of a church choir rehearsal, listening to gospel music all his life, and even though his parents were pastors, they didn't necessarily force him to always listen to gospel music, but they've instilled an appreciation in all of his siblings to appreciate all genres of music. And so inside of my household, you would hear country, you would hear rock, jazz, R&B, soul. You would hear everything, obviously gospel music. But believe it or not, you didn't hear much classical. And as a matter of fact, I didn't really go to many concerts to see any conductors on stage, to see any orchestras on stage. But most of my classical music exposure came from watching Looney Tunes. And this was the clip, like I told you before, that 5-year-old boy knew he had to and wanted to be this conductor. But the only dilemma was the fact that he couldn't see himself in that position. And it's like, I couldn't not pursue music. I had this dream of becoming a conductor, but I thought I couldn't be one. But music was in my everyday life. I was pretty much, music pumps through my blood. And so I had to pursue it. And so, yes, I played saxophone all the way through college. And yes, I sang all my life. And yes, I took piano lessons in high school, and that actually became my primary instrument in college. But when I got to undergrad, while they didn't have any conducting majors in undergrad, when I got to undergrad, I decided to pursue music education, partly because I had a passion for teaching, but really because that was the closest I thought I could get to becoming an actual conductor. I said, you know what, I'm going to be a band teacher, a choir director, and I'll be able to stand in front of a group of students and wave my arms. And I can get the satisfaction that way, because that was the closest that I thought I could get to it. And it probably does not help that even once I got to college, I found out that they had a conducting program, and I got to speak with one of the conducting professors there. And I told him about my aspirations and told him about my dreams to become a conductor, but said, well, how does that happen? Because I don't necessarily have the tool. I don't know what to do. So how do I become a conductor? I asked this professor. And he told me, Jonathan, I don't think you should do that. I think you should remain a music educator, because I think that's where you'll be most successful. But never told me why. And then also didn't help when the following year, there was a family friend who's inside of the classical music world, if you will. And I decided to ask them, because I'm like, they've obviously worked with conductors before. They know this experience. And so I said, what do I have to do to become a conductor? And she put her hand on my shoulder and was like, son, listen, stay in gospel and stay in jazz, because they aren't going to want to see you up there as a conductor. And then, because the third time is the charm, I go back to school that same year and talk to the orchestra director at the school. And I found out that he was teaching independent study to undergraduate students who had a passion for conducting. And I saw all the students that were getting into his program. None of them looked like me, but I figured, well, why not give it a shot? So I go to this teacher. I give him the full spiel, give him the whole story, tell him my dream had always been to become a conductor. Thought I couldn't become one, but maybe this is my chance. Would you be able to accept me as your independent study student? I have a free schedule. He looks me up and down and simply says no, and turns around and walks away from me. And so after the third time, and then after, the rejection as a child of never seeing a conductor that looked like me, I stopped pursuing it. I quit because I'm like, what point is there? I couldn't find a conductor that looked like me. At least I knew they existed, but I didn't know any. I couldn't see any. And then these professionals who are in the field, people who are actually doing the job that I would like to do, are telling me to stay away from it. They're saying no to me. And so why pursue that? And it wasn't until that same year, a close friend of mine, lost her life. And in that moment, that really broke my heart. I had realized that, well, look, she wasn't able to pursue her dreams. She wasn't able to pursue the rest of her life because it was taken from her. And so now I have to stop and think, well, look, tomorrow is not promised. And while tomorrow is not promised, I have to be able to pursue my dreams. I have to be able to pursue my goals. Even when other people are looking at me, not necessarily believing in me, people don't necessarily see what I can see. Even though that happens, even though they're professionals inside the field, I have to push that aside and keep pursuing and keep pushing. And it wasn't an easy thing to do. But I kid you not. And some people would say this is fate. Some people say it was luck, but me, I say it was God. Literally that same year, that same moment when I made that decision, I found out about this student-run orchestra, as I said in my bio, called the Buckeye Philharmonic. And there was a student conducting the orchestra, and he somehow found out about my interest in conducting. And that year happened to be his last year, his senior year of college, and he had to graduate. And so he had invited me to some of their rehearsals. I got to sit in and observe. He even let me lead a couple of pieces just to try inside of rehearsal, just to get my hands dirty a little bit. And after all of that had happened, they were the orchestra, and he'd done that for a couple of people, but the orchestra had to vote in their next music director. And they unanimously voted me in to be their next music director. And I'm like, what? Here I am, finally getting my opportunity, getting my dream. Like I'm achieving my dream. I'm finally getting the opportunity to conduct an orchestra. And I was able to use this orchestra to apply for different programs, whether it be schools or summer festivals or summer programs. Went to a few summer programs and finally applied to some schools, sent these pre-screening videos in to these schools. And one of the schools I applied for, the professor was also the teacher at the summer program I went to and told me to apply to his school. Another school I had a connection with, and then there was a school that I had no inkling of getting, and I didn't think I would ever get into it. I thought it was too prestigious for me. And the school that I thought was too prestigious for me ended up being the only school that accepted me and invited me to ever do anything with conducting. And I was in complete shock. And that happened to be Peabody Conservatory, where I got to study with Marin Alsop. And then from then on, the rest is history, yes. But then from then on, I got introduced to different programs like the Chicago Sinfonietta, where that was pretty much my home orchestra, my training orchestra, the orchestra, the first professional orchestra I'd ever been in front of, where they really taught me about the importance of representing myself in a world that doesn't necessarily want to accept me, but also taught me the importance of redefining classical music and changing the face of the orchestra. And I got to participate in different discussions and participate in different masterclasses and workshops to really help expand my mind in really what the 21st century orchestra should look like. And then from then on, I go on to become the assistant conductor of the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra. And I tell you my story, not to just brag about my accolades, but I tell you my story, not even to make you think, oh, wow, that was so inspiring, such an inspiring start to your story. And it's such a great ending to the story. Yes, absolutely. But the beginning was not pretty. It was nowhere near a straight path to just victory, but it was a challenge. an extreme challenge that most of my colleagues would say, everybody has challenges in life, but most of my colleagues would say they had people help carry them through. But it wasn't until I got through my undergrad years and got finally up to the Chicago Symphony, it wasn't until I got to that point where I finally had help. But most of everything that happened before then was all by myself. I was alone, didn't have much support outside of my family. And I had to fight to get to this point in my career, get to this point in my life where most of the world was trying to tell me no. And most of the world did not want to see me here. And most of the world did not want me to succeed. But I also tell you this part of my story to spark questions in your mind. Has there ever been a point in my life where I've turned a student away because I didn't believe in their dreams, or because I didn't necessarily think they could ever possibly pursue a certain thing? Or, to make you think even about inclusion, did I ever make a student not necessarily feel welcome in our environment? Did I make a student not feel safe or felt like they belonged inside of my classroom or inside of my church or wherever I've gone? Have I ever made someone not feel like they belong there? But then really the key part of my story is representation. For me, or not even for me, for a lot of my friends, I have a lot of athletic friends. And for a lot of my friends, they became athletes because they had athletes that they could look up to, and athletes that looked like them, where they could see themselves as an athlete. And so they were able to become an athlete because they had that representation. But what about the conductors? What about the orchestra musicians or musicians in general? For me, if I had a Paul Freeman, who's the founder of the Chicago Symphony, if I had a Jimmy DePriest, if I had a Michael Morgan in my life as a little child, how would my story look if I was able to at least know about those conductors? All I had was Bugs Bunny. I had no representation. And so I was never able to imagine really myself as a conductor. I was able to, make it up or do things I saw Bugs Bunny do. But when I was thinking about my future, I didn't think I could do it because I never saw it. And so it had to become my goal now, my mission now that I've achieved this job now, and it wasn't easy, but now that I've achieved this position, now that I've finally got to the point that I want to be, and while I'm not done, but while I'm here, it now had to become my mission to become that representation, to inspire a younger generation of musicians, creators, thinkers who look like me, or who might be considered, undervalued, or people who, as much as I hate this word, people who might be considered a minority. I can be that representation for them. It's my goal, my job to be the Bugs Bunny, to be who Bugs Bunny was to me. I want to be that to the next generation of students, to the next generation of musicians, because I don't want them to ever get to a position where if somebody tells them no, they don't have proof. But if somebody tells them no, I want them to be able to say, no, because there's this conductor, Jonathan Rush, who does this. And because I see him doing this, I can do this. There's other conductors, other people who look like me. There's other people who are in this field who look like me, who do what I want to do now. And so now I know that I can do this. Now I know that I can pursue this. I want to be that for these students. And I have a lot of colleagues who want to do the same there. But that's really the point of this. It's representation. And how can we make it so that these students, whenever they're faced with a no, are never discouraged or turned away from their dream because they never saw somebody that looked like them? How do we change that? How do we fix that? That's my goal. That's my job. And that's some of the work that I'm doing here. But I also want to get you thinking about things like that as well. Thank you.
Jonathan, I think if you're looking at the chat as you were talking, I think your message is resonating at a really high level, and we are all very thankful for the model that you have become and continue to be. And one of the groups that you have been a tangible model for was and continues to be Sistema Ravinia. So Isaac Sinnett, if you can please join us and talk a little bit about what this looks like in your world.
Great. Thank you so much, Scott, and thank you so much to Save the Music and Arts at SEL for inviting Ravinia to share our experiences tonight. And Jonathan, it's such a pleasure to be reconnected with you, and thank you so much for sharing your story, and thank you so much for sharing your vision and how we can reimagine the orchestra to include everyone. Such a pleasure to be here with you. So a little bit about Ravinia, of which Jonathan has been to, and we've had the opportunity to work with him. We're one of North America's longest running and most artistically diverse music festivals. And if you've never attended a concert, we'll hope you'll join us sometime, maybe see a chamber music concert, some jazz, perhaps John Legend or Santana. And we really hope you'll see one of our signature Chicago Symphony Orchestra residency concerts led by Jonathan's mentor and our chief conductor, Maren Alsop. Maren is a pioneer for change and for reimagination. She is one for breaking barriers, and we're so thankful for her modeling and for her leadership in our programs. Reach Teach Play is a robust portfolio of music education and engagement opportunities, ensuring that music remains accessible to all. We partner with underrepresented schools and communities and students to provide unfettered access to those historically not invited and with the least resources. Our programs provide children and families with inclusive music education programs and live music experiences in their schools and communities and at Ravinia. Our programs reach thousands throughout Chicago to bring them the joy of music, to teach the foundations of music and allow children to express themselves creatively, and to encourage all students to play instruments, to develop their talents, and to deepen their connection with music. Tonight, I'm going to talk about one of those programs, Sistema Ravinia, which is modeled after El Sistema's music education model that emphasizes both community building and musical excellence, where we are at the intersection of access and excellence. Our version looks like an after-school orchestral training program for students in the 3rd through 8th grade, and now beyond, but we'll get to that a little bit later. Sistema Ravinia fosters social development and creates pathways for continued success. At Sistema Ravinia, we aim to create a world where every student can envision themselves in the world's greatest orchestras and on the greatest stages. So what does this look like as we move to the next slide and we think about how reimagining the orchestra through SEL looks for us? Two things that we need to ensure that are a part of this conversation, both tonight and ongoing, is that it must be intentional and it must be embedded throughout everything that we do. SEL is not something that we do to our students. It is something that we do with them. It's not an exercise that we get over with in minute number 1, and it's not something that we squeeze into the last minute before we see the students. It must be intentional and it must be embedded. SEL is a way of planning, a way of listening, responding, and connecting. So let's start at the beginning. Let's look at the next slide with identity. And we need to ensure that we don't start at the middle or the end, and that we do start at the beginning. Connection comes first. We must listen and we must build trust. So what does this look like for us? There's some resources available for you. And on the next slide, we have some examples of what that looks like for us in a student journal that our team has created. We want to first find out about our students as individuals. We want to be in tune with and validate what they are feeling. On the right, you see a practice log where a student can show their relationship to their musical journey to us. And on the left is one of my favorite slides, our favorite pages in the journal, because it talks about your orchestra experience. Oftentimes in ensemble programs, we start with the ensemble first, and then we put all of the program or all the students into that ensemble. But we want to know the individual students first. For an ensemble, we need to have 50 yours, and then we can have one ensemble. So let's move on to belonging. Let's build and create a community of belonging. And our next slide can showcase that. We start with identity. We create that connection. We build trust and belonging. We develop relationships. We take the opportunities to celebrate cultural assets, and we create moments for vulnerability. So how can our students see themselves in this space? They need to see themselves in others, as Jonathan said. They have to see that this is for them. We need to broaden our musical repertoire and our learning experiences. And we need to remember our families and communities. We need to create spaces and environments that build relevance for our parents. So let's take a look at this next picture. Jonathan was at Ravinia this past summer. He made his Chicago Symphony Orchestra debut, as he mentioned, and it was a phenomenal moment. We just celebrated it so much. But in between the dress rehearsal and the concert that evening, Jonathan came over and worked with our students. And you can see them here in an outdoor environment at Ravinia, and even the parents sitting through rain to see their students perform. But before they made one note of music together, Jonathan looked around the tent of musicians, and he said to them, "I am so excited to be here tonight, and I am so excited for you, because I never had the opportunity to play an ensemble led by a conductor that looks like me." We need to broaden our repertoire. All kinds of great music exists. We need to play different styles, and that allows our students to develop different skills. They can learn what each other likes to play and learn and have conversations about it. Music needs to recognize cultural assets of the students. We have one of our nucleos in north of Chicago in Waukegan, a town with a high Mexican heritage. Those students wanted to play a significant Mexican dance, and so they were able to play that in their woodwind ensemble. We've arranged Motown hits, which allowed our parents in that community to feel a deep connection to those students, because their students were playing music that they grew up with. We need to find and play music by minority composers. And there's a huge gap in elementary and in middle school ensemble music. Let's commission more works by Black and Brown composers to create really great works at those levels so that the students can see themselves represented in the music. And this next slide has a great picture that I just love. Look at the connection between those two dancers. This was at one of our winter concerts. And usually what happens is we have a couple different levels of ensembles, and there's some large stage changes. And someone like me would get up onto the stage and just talk. And let me say, no one's coming to me after the concert and saying, "Wow, that was really engaging. I hope you talk a lot more next time." We need to hand the stage over. We need to create those experiences. This was the Chicago Ballet Dance Folklorico, and you could sense that these families felt a connection. They felt the relevance for them. They could begin to understand a deeper connection with why their students were pursuing music. If our families don't feel a connection and a community of belonging, how can our kids? And finally, I want to show a quote that epitomizes a sense of belonging. And if we can switch to the next slide, we can see that our students remain the best reminders and barometers for progress. This is what creating a safe and brave space looks like. And this is what leads to agency. And if we can show that picture of agency, honestly, I didn't know what to say around agency today. And I was talking with a colleague, and they suggested that I contemplate, maybe you can't talk about agency because this is where you don't have the control. This is where the students have the control. It might look pretty blurry to you. And if we journey back through the slides of these three young girls, in identity, it was pretty, it wasn't that clear. It was kind of faded. And then we move into belonging, and the picture starts to have a lot more vibrancy, but it wasn't quite there yet. And then we move into agency, and we have the full vibrancy of this picture, because agency is where student voice is heard, it's where it's amplified, and it begins to create change. What can agency look like? It can look like a lot of things. On the next slide, we have some concert dedications. This is students writing dedications for the concerts for our first time back to performing live in person after this fall with COVID. What I love is this bottom one. I dedicate this program to me because I'm still here. We just heard that from Jonathan. He was still there. That's agency. That's the opportunity to create change. No matter what, I'm dedicating this program to me because I am still here. And the next slide is a picture worth 1,000 words. It's that moment, it's that connection between instructors and students. In System Ravinia, we have an incredible community of instructors. Around the world, we have so many programs that are creating change through their communities of instructors and our schools around the world. Instructors and teachers are allowing and helping students to create identity, to build a community of belonging, and to foster environments for change and for agency. Another example of agency, and if we move to the next slide, we can show that we need to pass the microphone to our students. If there's a moment for a student to speak in a concert, we need to pass the microphone to them. And it's okay if it's not perfect. And in fact, it's probably perfect that it's not perfect because it's their words, not mine and not ours. Here are 3 high school students, and they emceed one of our winter concerts, the entire thing. Again, that would have been maybe me or somebody else on the stage, but it was the students taking the microphone, and they talked about their past experience in System Ravinia, their current experiences, and their future dreams. And they were really honest, and it was great. They talked about how it was hard. They talked about things that they wished had been different, and they were able to show what they needed. And one of the things that they did because of the agency, and I mentioned before that our program went through the 8th grade, we didn't know how to engage in a meaningful and intentional way the high schoolers, but they came to us and they wanted to create their own ensemble that was for them, where they could recruit the musicians, they could play a part in the leadership role of selecting the repertoire and helping to build community within their own ensemble. And I wrap up on the last slide today, showing that the impact, or maybe better yet, the progress of reimagination can seem blurry. But when we invite and welcome, when we listen, respond, and connect with our students, seeds of change can grow. So together, we can create a new identity, we can build communities of belonging, and we can facilitate an environment for agency to reimagine the orchestra for everyone.
Isaac, thank you so much. Such a powerful testimony to how the work that Jonathan just highlighted as essential is taking place in your program. So now we're going to go to just a powerful moment where we're going to start a conversation. And for everyone who's joining us today, please, please, please put questions that you would like our panelists to answer in the Q&A. We have a couple of things to tee up, and we're going to start with Jonathan. And Jonathan, I know that you have a very special relationship with Maren Alsop. And I would like for you to talk a little bit about that, because we saw in the chat a connection that your journeys were very similar. And I would also like to highlight, before I throw this to you, that there is a phenomenal documentary that is out right now called The Conductor. So if you could talk a little bit about how Maren served as an inspiration for you.
Absolutely. Maren served and it still is a huge inspiration for me, a great friend and great mentor as well. Wow, there's so many good things I can say about Maren, but I think one of the biggest things that I appreciate her for is the fact that she gave me a chance. When I was talking about the schools that I had applied for, as I said, one of the conductors at one of the schools knew me and told me to apply to his program, rejected me. There was another school in my home state, rejected me. I applied to Peabody to study with Maren. This, like I said, was the last school I ever thought I could get into. And she's the one that invited me. And then when I got there, she's the one that even worked with me in my audition. And then now I was able to study with her. But I think one of the greatest things that Maren taught me is just the fact that I need to be authentic. She understood the challenge of, being a minority in this world of conducting because she's a woman. And as many people know, while the numbers are changing and things are definitely getting a whole lot better, in the professional orchestral scene, you really don't see any women conductors. For my case, it was I never really saw any Black conductors or women conductors. And so Marin understood the struggle, but she also understood the work that I had to do. And she even would tell me, while I can never understand your position, I do know what it means to be looked down upon. And I do know what it means to when people, underestimate or undervalue you because of the way that you look. And so because she understood that, she would help me fight through some of the negative issues. She would tell me, I've gotten a whole lot more no's than I've gotten yeses in my entire career. And that's something that I've always appreciated about her. But it was really just the fact that she taught me to be authentic, to stay true to myself and never let anyone try and take that away from me. And that's something that I hold on to. Something that I always try to achieve and strive for, to just be my true authentic self, programming the music that I like, but also holding on to my background. My background was completely different than all of my colleagues when I was studying at Peabody, because I studied music. I learned how to play music by ear. I didn't start reading music. Like, I was behind in a lot of different areas, but I still had this dream. I knew I still had this gift, but it was like, how do I spent so much of my time trying to be like everyone else. And Marin's like, no, you need to be like you. And when I took that advice, I got to the place that I'm at now. And yes, you're right. She does have this film called The Conductor. It's absolutely incredible and inspiring film about just Marin's life. And you might see a familiar face inside that film as well.
Maybe teed that up for a reason, but absolutely. Where my mind is going here, especially after hearing Isaac speak about what this looks like with his students at Sistema Ravinia, is that when we talk about the orchestra, we are talking about a juggernaut of tradition, something that goes back centuries, that has a model that is very hard to break, that even when we look at our top tiered orchestras around the United States, the programming and the representation is limited. So my question is, how do we approach this topic of tradition? And I know, Jonathan, you are very, very strongly steeped in this belief that good music is good music, but there's this fine line between representation and playing just Beethoven and Brahms.
Oh, yes. Absolutely. I might jump around, but I'm going to try to address everything that you've mentioned too. The idea of representation inside of our orchestras. The representation inside of our orchestras, it needs to change. I always laugh at or am amazed at the fact that our top orchestras in the country can be, and I can only speak from my perspective, but the top orchestras in our country can be at the heart of cities that are 75% Black, right? And then not have one single Black member inside their orchestra. Or it can be any population and not have any person in that population or in that demographic inside of their orchestra. And that never made sense to me, because I'm like, how do you claim to be that city's orchestra, but you don't look like the city? It's an issue. Or you don't play anything that connects to the city or to its people. And so that's when we get into this idea of tradition, because I'm a conductor and I can tell you one of my favorite composers is Brahms. Like I'm right there with everyone else. But at the same time, when do we find the balance, or when can we allow tradition to pretty much be our foundation, but innovation really become our goal or what we're looking towards? We should not be, and while yes, 250 years, it's great, but why was our focus in the 21st century, our focus in 2020 on celebrating Beethoven's 250th birthday and not celebrating, composers, innovative composers who are, on the rise, who might be composers of color, or might be a woman composer, or might be, a composer who is not necessarily represented well inside of our field? Why aren't we representing that? Why are we celebrating Beethoven in a world where we've always, and I love Beethoven, don't get me wrong, but in a world where we always perform Beethoven and our numbers have been going down and they keep going down, but we decide to, honor Beethoven and expect our numbers to go up. But then we try to figure out why our concert halls aren't getting filled. They're not getting filled because we're only geared towards a specific audience. And tradition does that to us. Tradition allows us to be connected to the audiences that we had 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. And we're not looking to the future, and we're not looking to our next generation of audience members. Because when the audience that we've always catered to from 40 years ago passes on, who are we going to have in there? And so how do we get this new generation, the TikTok generation of people come into the world, right? How do we get them to come into our world? Well, first of all, we have to get rid of that rhetoric and start going into their world, right? We have to start going into different places rather than expecting people to come to us. We have to change the way that we perform music, change the place that we perform music in, change the stigma, this high class, uppity, very, very, this I can't even think of an appropriate word to say, but get rid of this, stigma of, the orchestra, we play down at you. You have to look up to us. We have to come dressed in tuxes and tails and things of that sort. When I couldn't tell you the last time I walked around in tails. I don't even conduct with tails on. So, but people, the world that we live in, nobody wants that anymore. If we present ourselves that way, while it's a formal way and while it's a great way to present ourselves, people don't connect to that. Not many people connect to that. Not many people relate to that. And so how do we find a way to keep tradition? Like I said, let that be our foundation, but then also open the door for new initiatives and new things, and that's how I think we kind of get around this conversation. Because a lot of times when people hear tradition in classical music, they think, we just throw it out the door. But I'm like, absolutely not. Because, I think Beethoven is still very, very valuable. And there's things in there that we can learn. But I also think that Samuel Coleridge Taylor is also very, very valuable. And my great friend Carlos Simon. And I think Carlos Simon is or like a Valerie Coleman. I think those people are very, very also, they also have something to bring, something to offer. And that's things that we have to start bringing to our concert hall. We have to start bringing in the old and the new, find a way to make it work so that we can, yes, make everybody happy, but also let classical music reflect the century that it's in. Yes, it might have been written, 2-3 centuries ago, but here we are in the 21st century. And so how does a classical music or orchestral concert look in the 21st century? And it's not just putting tradition at the forefront, but it's recognizing tradition as our foundation, but also opening the door for more.
To me, that was the perfect response for reimagining the orchestra. Mm-hmm. Isaac, what does this look like when you are working with young students who are seeing that tradition? And I have immense respect for what Ravinia is doing and what Marin is doing as the artistic director. But there's elements of when we go there, we're still hearing Tchaikovsky. We're still hearing some of the what Jonathan just brought to us. So how are you addressing tradition with your students?
Yeah, I think it's a really great question, and Jonathan, I really appreciate so much your response and so much your modeling and your leadership for us and your inspiration. And I think there's a number of angles that we need to address. And the first thing is like, we want to teach the students how to play musical instruments at a really extraordinary level. Like, how can we give them the ability to enjoy this platform of music that is something that brings everyone so much pleasure, and once we can have that opportunity, then we can start taking a look at some of the music. How do we create more opportunities to have arrangements of a wide variety of music? I mentioned Motown arrangements before. That was something specifically for our parents, and that's really important too. Our concerts will have something from Beethoven to Dvorak to Beyonce. And I think all of those are really important, but I think it's the sense of community. That's how I think we can start to break tradition in terms of like how our students can feel representation, because if they can feel that sense of belonging and community, that's what we really need to be striving for. And then music can be the output of which we can share. Music is about sharing the progress or something that we're working on together with others. It's not necessarily the ends or the means to the end. It's part of the journey. And so, how can we celebrate what students are working on? It doesn't really matter what they're working on, but it's how we appreciate what they're doing and what they're sharing with us that I think is one of the most valuable aspects that we can instill in our kids. And we need to instill them to be leaders in this process. So for example, we had a group of students, we did a residency with the group WindSync. And normally it looks like the adults planning the residency, and it looks like the adults planning the concert, and it looks like the adults planning the music. We brought in a group of students to be the producers of the concert. They went to the church, they went and said, we want to do a concert. We want to do, and then they came to us and to WinSync and said, this is the music that we want to do. And you know what it was? It was a variety of music that included traditional classical music and new music. And this is what the students want to do. This is what they want to play, because ultimately they want to share themselves with others.
Isaac, absolutely. Absolutely. And as Jonathan said, and as we're getting accolades in the chat, Isaac, when you do the Beethoven to Beyonce concert, it's going to sell out. We're there. We're in.
And Maestro Rush will be there conducting and leading it.
I would love to.
You know where my mind is going now? Because this is a conversation that I think many people are having in the profession right now. It's saying representation. It's important. If you can see it, you can be it. I mean, we just had Jesse Montgomery, who's just an amazing composer, be the composer in residence for the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. A powerful representation. But I think sometimes we get trapped into this space of tokenism. It's, I programmed one piece by a woman composer or a underrepresented composer or a Black composer. Jonathan, let me throw this to you, because I think that representation is essential as step one. That representation is what we need to get to equity. So what does equity look like in the orchestra?
Well, first of all, if you ever get to a point where you're saying, okay, I've done enough, then you haven't done enough. You should never, ever get to that point, because there's never I've done enough, because this isn't just an issue that lasts for a certain amount of time. I've even heard someone say, oh, this diversity thing will pass over. And that's horrible, because it's like, it shouldn't be something that should just pass on in a couple of years. No, this is everyday life. And so if you ever get to the point where you feel like you've done enough, then you're doing it wrong. Oh goodness, equity to me, this, I'm glad you brought it here, because actually equity is going through my mind even as Isaac was presenting. And to me, equity looks like in an orchestra, in our orchestra. To me, everyone has a voice, no matter how you look, no matter who you are. Everyone has a voice. Everyone is seen on stage, from the performers that are, in the orchestra world. So the performers in the orchestra, to maybe the conductor on stage, maybe to the soloists that you've invited, or maybe even to the choir that you sang, or even everyone is seen in the hall too. Everyone, all different colors and things of that sort. But then also equity to me is everyone is. And I was writing things down as you were going, as I keep looking down. But to me also, equity is everyone is respected. A lot of times we go into places just because somebody looks a certain way, or because someone's a certain age, we feel like they don't have much to offer or much to bring. And I mean, this is going to get into inclusion as well, so I got to try not to get ahead of myself. But we don't give them a voice. We also don't listen to them. We don't pay them any mind, and just because of our own perception. But then to me, equity is also learning about, especially when it comes to schools or orchestras, learning about different composers and different conductors, or, learning about different musicians, people who might have been born inside the 20th century or 21st century. It's learning about everything, not putting emphasis on one era, or not putting emphasis on just one person, but giving everyone a shot, giving everyone a chance. But really the biggest thing is giving everyone a voice. And I think that was really like the biggest thing that connected to me, especially Isaac, inside of your presentation. It's giving your students a voice, because at the end of the day, when I perform, I'm going to give my heart to something that I'm extremely passionate about. And if you give the students the space to express their passion, to say, this is what I want to perform, this is what I want to do, that performance is not only going to be meaningful for the performer. And even those who are like, I would never, ever want to go to a concert with Beyonce, those who are saying that too, I promise you that if you see these students perform with their passion, it's going to hit you in a different place too. Just like that moment whenever you saw your first concert, just like that moment hit you, those performers that you watched had a passion as well, and they're performing what they wanted to perform. and it hits you a different way. And you might not have known anything about that particular piece or genre that you listen to. So give it a chance. But that's how equity looks to me. Sorry, I had to preach to some of those out there.
Jonathan and Isaac, please.
No, I just wanted to jump in and just say, I was really thinking about representation earlier today, and like, why does it matter so much? And I just want to add to Jonathan, representation matters so much because if you don't have it, it's just a conversation. And we need to move past conversation, and we need to move into impact. And then building agency for the students. That's why it has to start with identity and getting to know them first. Because if we don't get to know them first, then it's just whatever we decide to do to the students. And we know that in education, we need to do things with the students. Now, does that make a teacher not the expert? Of course not. The teacher is always the expert in the room, but the students allow the expert knowledge to land with them, and so that they can take it and they can grow it into something else, and then we can start to create change. There's students that are in our program and many programs around the world that are going to be in the orchestras of the future. They are going to change the face of the orchestra, and they are going to change the face of what it looks like in these jobs. One of the students at Ravinia is going to take my job someday, and I can't wait for that to happen. It's going to be amazing, and they're going to do such a next level job in doing so, because it's going to be diverse and it's going to include all of the voices. I was just in a meeting yesterday that had 5 very different people in it, and every single person brought up something that was so monumentally important to the success of what we were discussing. And this is why student voice is so important, because what they have to say, what we have to say, and that space of vulnerability for dialogue is what can create that equity and that reimagination of the orchestra. As I said, it's really hard for me to talk about agency because it's not clear, and I'm no longer in control when there's agency, and that is perfect. That's when the students are in control, and that's when we can create change and reimagination.
Safely and comfortably uncomfortable is a good place to be. That means that we're in a space for growth. Isaac, so good. The chat is just exploding right now with suggestions on how agency can come about. And one of the most powerful suggestions is to have students compose and play their own music as part of concerts. But this also flies in the face of, I'm going to come back to that T word, tradition, right? Because orchestras have been typically prized for cleanliness, prized for performance, prized for putting the product on the stage. So I kind of have a two-pronged question here. One is, how do we get a change of that narrative? How do we get people to have a stronger buy-in that performance focus may not be the end-all, be-all? And secondly, how do we create a larger space where creativity can have a larger roles in our rehearsals and in our concerts?
Oh, those are some deep but great questions. Oh, goodness. Well, your first part of the question, where everything is, performance focused. I think one of the first things that we all need to do and when I say we all, I'm including myself, but also teachers, professors, studio teachers, musicians who are private teachers, everyone, we have to realize that not everyone is going to play in the symphony orchestra. And we have to also realize that not everyone is participating in our programs or not participating in music because they want to be a professional musician. Sometimes people are just doing this as an outlet. Sometimes people are doing this as a way to express themselves in an environment that allows them to express themselves because they're not able to express themselves anywhere else. But it's not always because they just want to perform. And so if we approach our teaching and we teach every single student this way, that we are always going to be performers and you have to know how to play this concerto or this sonata, you have to know how to do this, you have to know how to conduct that. If we always present it this way, we might lose somebody because number one, we're not connecting to them, but also now this person might be feeling like they don't belong because they don't necessarily have that aspiration. And now all of a sudden we're not even creating an inclusive environment. And so we have to have this idea and be fine with it. Be okay. Be content with the fact that not everyone is going to be the orchestral musician. And as a matter of fact, and this is going to segue into the next part of your question about creativity. As a matter of fact, the 21st century musician will most likely not just be a symphony orchestra musician. You know, in the world that we are right now, you know, there are probably 30 orchestras that, you know, a musician can play and, you know, have a full-time career in and not have to do anything else. Well, if one position opens up in every single one of those orchestras, there are only 30 positions open. And then we have thousands and thousands upon thousands of people who study this stuff. So what else do we do? What else do we teach them? Something I'm grateful about is when I was spending time at Peabody, there was an emphasis on how the 21st century musician looks, and even the 21st century orchestral musician looks, to the point where, and I think even to this day, they created multiple ensembles at the school where students are on a rotation basis. So some might be able to play in the symphony orchestra, and then some might play in the pops orchestra or the studio orchestra. Some might play in the modern orchestra or the chamber orchestra. But they have all these different, yes, it's orchestras. I mean, it's a music school, but you know, they have all these different outlets that these students can look in and try to participate in, but then also create opportunities for students to allow them to think beyond just playing in an ensemble or playing in an orchestra. What would the solo career look like? Or you know, you being a musician, you playing the violin, what if you're not going to play classical music? What else could you play? I have so many friends who play gospel music or soul, who record and who are extremely successful in doing what they do. But sometimes they felt like they weren't going to be successful because the teacher was always preaching to them that they have to be a symphony orchestra musician, or they have to be a performer in that way. But then I did just lay out all these performance things and things. I did lay out all these performance opportunities because I'm a performer. Yes, I know I just did that. But then on top of that, the other side of that is when we get out of this mindset that all of our students are going to be performers, we create more room for creativity. And we allow our students to start, okay, well, maybe I'm not going to be a performer, but maybe I'm going to be a writer. Maybe I'm going to be a songwriter, or maybe I'm going to be a music therapist, or maybe I'm going to do something that's completely opposite of what people might expect me to do inside of my career. Maybe I'm going to, you know, be the person that cues all the music on ESPN. You know, there's so many different outlets. And I think what we have to do is present everything and give the students a chance to choose, rather than, you know, tell them and preach to them that you have to do this to be successful, because it ends up screwing us all up, you know. Forgive my French, even though it's not really French, but forgive that, all right? But seriously, I think that, yes, everything I just said, it's very true. Get out of that performance mindset, but get them to a mindset of just creating, being creators, being innovators, being thinkers. They might be a symphony orchestra musician, they might be an arts administrator, they might be a rapper, they might be a dancer, they might be anything. All right. We can't just preach to them. They have to do this one specific thing. All right. I'm done talking.
We have to widen the aperture of the definition of professional musician. And that's where identity, belonging, and agency is really going to take root. Isaac, what does this look like at Sistema Ravinia with creativity and the students putting their own voice into the process and the product?
Yeah, definitely. Before I do that, I just want to take note of like one comment in the chat that, you know, talks about listening to our students, and their perspective may open our eyes to new understandings. Really important. You know, listening is really the key to everything, and it can open up so many avenues. And I've learned so much from the students. So really appreciate David for putting that into the chat. That really resonated with me. You know, I think creativity, and I preface all of what our experiences are saying that we have so much to reflect on and so much to grow with, and so much opportunities that we may have fallen that we need to respond and to improve and to create greater opportunities for students. You know, we want to create scenarios where students can learn the foundations of music, but where they can also have experiences where they can express what they're learning through their own creativity. Even in the journal, and I don't know that I put it as a sample page, and I should have, it's the opportunity for students to start creating their own music right away, and to have conversations about, like, why did I create this? What did you like about what somebody else created? And I think that involves dialogue so that it's not just isolated within a student self or with our own selves. And that's what I hear, from Jonathan and from all of our conversations. It's like, it's when it's within isolation of something, then we can't see change and we can't see those opportunities for students to have creativity. It could be as simple as one of our program locations for the cover of a concert program. It's no longer just what we would do traditionally. Students submit artwork, and then the students themselves select which artwork is going to be featured on the program. It could look like collective composition, where they can create a composition based on a storyline, and they create it themselves. It could look like a jazz musician coming in and learning about improvisation. We've done some incredible work with Gwen Laster and Damon Banks from the Creative Improvisers Orchestra, and if nobody knows them, definitely reach out to them. And it's the exact same experience with a different tradition, not necessarily note reading, but the opportunity to improvise, because as Jonathan said, there's no one way to be a musician. And I think that's the most important thing. It's about this experience and what that means for your own development. It's about the community. And I think, the more that we can express that community and we can allow students to express themselves through that, the more success we can see. And I think, I'm really looking forward to a day when we have a symphony orchestra concert and it's a student composition from our own program that we get to feature. Can't wait for that.
Isaac, thank you so much for those really tangible examples. Friends who are watching, Jonathan and Isaac have both graciously become willing to keep this conversation going. So we know we're at the hour, but we're going to keep on talking for a little bit because we have some great questions that we still want to get to. So we're going to keep on going with this. Isaac, along with that, just a big question, because obviously Jonathan's incredible. I think everyone here just agrees with that. But when he leaves, how do you keep that momentum? How do you keep that energy? We know the power of the guest. What do you do after Jonathan leaves to keep that going?
Yeah, I think it's for all of us. We've all been to a conference, or we all been somewhere where we've been having a conversation. Like, once we go home tonight, we're going to be filled with energy. So what are we going to do for ourselves to continue this conversation and what it means? I think that there's just so many moments, and we have to remember that every single moment matters. And I think we need to remember that we don't know which moments might create significant change for somebody. And a tangible example of that is, for a number of years, we took students to Indiana, where we gathered with 5 or 6 programs from around the Great Lakes region. To this day, it's still the number one question that I get when I go into a school: when are we going back? And it's going to be the same when you see Jonathan, but it's these little sparks. And I think that's where the intentionality and the embeddedness of that intentionality comes in place, because you are trying to create sort of this linear pathway of all these sparks, all of this representation for the students, so that we can pass that momentum on to them, and they can really see themselves. Because if they only get to see Jonathan and that's what they get to see, we've heard from Jonathan what that looks like. That's a very long road. It's a very difficult path. And so creating more of those moments, ensuring that we have great representation within our own staff and faculty, ensuring that the embeddedness of creating identity, belonging, and agency is one of the foundational elements, because then whatever guest comes in, then you're allowed to have that foundation and you can carry the momentum on. If we do not have that embedded, then the flame is there, the spark, it dies down to a spark, and then it's gone. So we have to ensure that it's intentional and it's embedded, so that spark can continue to flicker.
Absolutely, Isaac. Jonathan, please. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all about intentionality. And how do we keep this going after I leave? Well, first we have to start, but then also after that, it's like we were saying before, not letting this be a one-time thing, or not letting this be something that you're just like, I've done enough. When I'm speaking to symphony orchestra, something that I applaud my orchestra, the Baltimore Symphony, about is the fact that their seasons are completely different than how they used to be. Last year was this past, I guess the current season that we're in is their season of discovery. And this is probably the most diverse amount of artists and conductors that they've had. And then the same thing's happening next year. And I can probably tell you the same thing's going to happen again and again. And it's not going to stop when I'm not the assistant conductor anymore either. But this is going to be something that they're going to keep on doing. And now it's something that even more orchestras are continuing to do. As teachers and as educators in general, when I leave, well, how do we make that? How do we make this mark? How do we make that happen after I leave? Well, first of all, it is, yes, showing them videos of conductors like me, but also making this a part of just like your everyday teaching. If you're going to highlight or focus on a composer, then focus on a different composer, somebody who's living, or focus on somebody who you've never heard of before, somebody who we've never heard of before. Show videos of these different performers, show videos of these different conductors. Let this be a part of just your everyday stuff. Out of your method books that you teach, there are, I can't give you the exact name, but I do know for a fact that there are now method books and training books that are out that are by composers of color and things of that sort, just to give you, they teach you all the same fundamentals. They teach you everything that I learned inside of Standard of Excellence and Essential Elements. They teach you everything, but it's just by a different composer. And I just think little things like that are inside of our everyday lives, and that I still see schools. Literally saw yesterday or 2 days ago, somebody using the Standard of Excellence book. I used it like 20 years ago. And so literally back there, I see it now. But literally, let this become our norm to all of a sudden it now becomes, it now will all of a sudden become our tradition, if you will. And now this is something that students are seeing every day. These are now teaching tools. Every year, they're getting something different. They're learning about different composer, different conductor. And then what I think is going to happen is in the future. So now when I'm an old man and now the students are, up and they're conducting, they're like the me of my generation now. There's no shock anymore. There's no surprise. And this is not going to be anything that they're going to have to teach about, or anything that they're going to have to say, hey, make sure that we get Black composers, or make sure that we get Latino, conductors. That's not going to have to be the conversation anymore. It's just going to be, oh, hey, look, here's a conductor, and this conductor happens to look this way. Or, this is, let's learn about this composer. It's not going to be a surprise anymore. Like, oh wow, this is Black. It's going to be like, okay, yes, this is this composer, and we're learning about him because it's valuable to us. And so I think if we start now, make it a part of our everyday, every year lives. Once these younger students grow up, it'll be a part of their life. It won't be new to them. It won't be a surprise. And all of a sudden, when I'm long gone, this is just normal. It's the norm. Okay.
I think sorry, Scott, but I just think it's perfect, Jonathan, because if we only have moments, then there's no opportunity to create something different. And, that's why it can't just be about a moment. I mean, if we're waiting for Jonathan to come once a year, then we can never do what we're actually telling the students that we're trying to do.
If you go to the gym once, are you going to see progress? No, you have to keep doing it. And I'm preaching to myself as well, because I have to go back to the gym. But no, seriously, like you have to keep working at something. I mean, a lot of us are musicians. We couldn't get to where we are without practicing. As much as we like it or don't like it, you have to practice. It's a continual effort. When the pandemic came and I wasn't really practicing that much, my conducting got really bad. And so you have to keep this going in order to be good at it. You have to keep this going in order for it to be a norm. It can't just be a one-time thing. All right, we did it, check mark, boom. No, it has to be a continuous effort, and your intentions. I'm not just doing it because I have to, but I'm doing this because it needs to happen. I want this to happen. And also I want to create a world where everyone feels like they can actually come and belong in this space.
The words aren't coming right now because I'm in such awe of what just happened. The examples that you're giving, my mind goes to the 5th grade trumpet player who only oils their valves once a month. And we know that those aren't, they're not functioning at peak capacity. So what do we need to do? We need to make sure that we are giving regular care to this. Right now, so many of us are navigating a world of self-care. How do we take care of ourselves? How do we navigate burnout? And I think that that's part of this conversation. Jonathan, There's a question that came into the chat that I want to elevate because I think it's really, really important and kind of brings this all together. What are some ways we can create opportunities, especially for young conductors in undergraduate programs and in high schools?
I think that's an awesome question. That I don't necessarily have an answer, but I've been playing around with ideas. And so honestly, I think some ways that we can encourage younger conductors, or even prepare younger conductors, especially in the undergrad world where they don't have it, is to, I mean, sometimes we have to just make opportunities. And by that, I mean, maybe that's taking some extra time in your day, getting some students together to create an ensemble where they just go over some basic conducting techniques, and then also go over just some basic music making with these musicians. They perform for them, and then they have to go ahead and rehearse them. Something as simple as that can go a long way. I've had a lot of friends email me and say, hey, look, I'm trying to get into grad school for conducting. What do I have to do? What do I have to do? They got some friends together, bought some pizza for them, and then they went and just played music, and they got to wave their arms a little bit, and then they got better and better and better. Now, every single one of those friends is inside of a conducting program. Every single conductor for the Buckeye Philharmonic, the orchestra that I led, every single music director of that orchestra that I remember, at least, has gone through a graduate conducting program. It is now inside the professional world. As a matter of fact, though, one conductor who started the orchestra is, he won't mind me saying this, he's the assistant conductor of the Buffalo Philharmonic Orchestra. And then he went to Boston Conservatory. I went to Peabody Conservatory. The next one went to Boston Conservatory again. And they're all going around this, like, you have to give them these opportunities. If they're not there, you have to create them, but then support them. Because when the Buckeye Philharmonic Orchestra started, we didn't have any support. None of the teachers wanted to support us because they thought we were competing against them. And it's like, no, we're just trying to create opportunities. And so, but opportunities always have to be created. If you have any young conductors who are interested in starting conducting or interested in doing anything, I am always, always, always more than happy to open my arms to speak with them, or even give them advice and help them in any way, shape, or form that I can, to even help advance their careers, because I want to present or give these students something that I did not have. And that's what I did not have, but it's something that I would have benefited heavily from. And so it's really just creating opportunities, telling them to research, read books. I had to read a lot of books. I researched videos of just conducting techniques, conducting patterns, and things of that sort. But the best way for a conductor to learn is to practice. And the only way that we can practice is to really be in front of an actual living group. So, but yes, I'm always available. And like I said, create opportunities, put them in front of your ensemble if you want to. And if they're in high school, put them in front of your band. My very first opportunity conducting was an 8th grade band. And because the teacher was like, who wants to conduct? And I just got to do a march. So it was just 1, 2, 1, 2. But I got to do it. And that was such a rewarding experience. It was so awesome. And so I think something even as little as that can go a long way.
But that creation requires that intentionality. We have to be purposeful about saying we're going to create these opportunities. They don't happen on accident. Thank you so much for that. Friends, Isaac, please.
Sorry, Scott, I just wanted to jump in because I think, this is where I've seen in programs like System Ravinia around the country where they're doing a great job of passing. I said pass the microphone earlier. We need to pass the baton and create leadership opportunities within this. And admittedly, this is a place where we really need to grow and challenge ourselves in System Ravinia to make sure that we have students that are conducting, that are leading, that are having these opportunities, because the ensembles and the students are there, and we can do this in programs and in schools across the country. So then when individuals like Jonathan or Maren come, they can help motivate those students that might be interested in conducting, because if everyone maybe doesn't get that opportunity, they might not feel that that's for them either. So I just wanted to say, I think there's a lot of responsibility on us to create these opportunities.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Friends, what an amazing conversation with two phenomenal leaders in the field. We're going to send us off with just some last thoughts. Isaac, last thoughts, please.
I mean, just an amazing, amazing conversation to be a part of with Jonathan. And, I really, encourage all of us, at System Ravinia and anywhere, to have the intentionality to understand that we need to create opportunities for the students. We need to listen. We need to ensure that their identities come first, that they have opportunities to have their cultural assets recognized, that we can create communities of belonging through that connection. And then ultimately, just like that picture, that the students can shine the brightest and they can have that moment of agency that will lead to change. And then the generation after them will create new change. So it's where do we put the opportunities so that we can create, keep passing that baton so that their growth doesn't stop, but it keeps on going. The platform is to set up the foundation so that that transformation, that change, that agency can live on.
Isaac, I know you started off by saying you weren't sure what agency means. I think you just hit it out of the park. Jonathan, last thoughts.
Last thoughts. Honestly, just because you can't see it with your own eyes does not mean that it's not worth investing in. My story is the proof to that. You're going to be faced with students who have a dream. And, just because people in your area don't typically become conductors does not mean that you shut this student's dream down of not becoming a conductor. People in my area didn't typically become conductors. People I grew up with, none of them are conductors. But, I got here because this was a dream. But if you believe in the people that come to you, if you believe in their dreams as much as they do, or try to support them in the best way possible, you're not steering them in the wrong direction by saying you can do that. But all you're doing is encouraging them. And so keep encouraging your students. Don't push them away. And also realize that they're going to get a lot of no's. But always just be that supportive system that they can run back to and be safe. Be safe in, because they need that. They need that type of security. They need that assurance that there is at least someone in their corner to help them pursue their dream, whatever that may be. And yeah.
I hope I can speak for everybody who's listening right now to say that the optimism that I have for the future of the orchestra is bright if we embrace what we spoke about. I started by saying there are students who don't fall in love with orchestra. An orchestra doesn't fall in love with them. And I have to give due credit. Those are the words of Urel Lashley, our Director of Student Empowerment. I firmly believe that if we embody everything that we talked about tonight, we're going to have a lot more students fall in love with orchestra. And orchestra is going to fall in love with them, because Beethoven to Beyonce, it's the future. My friends, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time, your wisdom, and your heart. Rebecca, back to you.